I'd felt off for days, a dull, throbbing ache that started somewhere in my gut and crawled up my spine like an unwelcome shadow. I brushed it off at first, thinking it was just the stress of the quarterly strategy review, another round of endless meetings and hollow pep talks. But that morning, as I walked into the conference room, the ache sharpened into something more sinister. I paused for a moment at the door, bracing myself against the cool metal frame, wondering if maybe I'd eaten something bad. Years of being told to man up, to walk it off, had made me an expert at pushing pain aside, at masking it beneath a practiced smile. I'd learned to work through deadlines with a pounding head, to show up at every meeting with that steady, reliable nod that said I was fine. But today, as I shuffled past the polished glass walls and settled into my seat, something felt fundamentally different. A hollow pit of dread nestled itself under my ribs, and no amount of willpower could chase it away. The room was its usual blend of suits and scripted optimism, people flipping through printed decks like it was gospel. I watched the words on the screen blur and shift, unable to focus on the numbers that had once been my comfort. My boss, Alan, droned on about synergy and market share, his voice a steady hum that buzzed like a wasp in my ear. I tried to take a sip of coffee, but my hand trembled so badly that I had to set the cup down before it spilled. A cold sweat prickled at my hairline, rolling down the side of my face, pulling at my collar. My breath caught in my throat, tight and labored, like my lungs had forgotten how to do their job. I clenched the edge of the table, knuckles white, trying to ground myself in the polished wood, the comforting texture that had carried me through 1,000 boardroom battles. But the pain wouldn't be silenced. It started as a sharp twist, then spiraled into something that felt like a serrated blade carving through my abdomen. My vision doubled, the faces in the room blurring into smudges of worry and annoyance. I heard Alan say my name, sharp and clipped, as if I'd dared to interrupt his performance. I tried to answer, but the words died in my throat. Another wave of pain hit, so sudden and violent that I let out a sound, somewhere between a gasp and a groan. I tried to swallow it down, but it was too late. My body betrayed me. I slumped forward, my head hitting the table with a dull thud that sounded like the world ending. I don't remember hitting the floor. I don't remember the startled cries or the scramble of footsteps as people rushed to my side. The next thing I knew, I was on my back, staring at the ceiling's harsh fluorescent lights, each one a blade of white fire in my eyes. Paramedics in blue uniforms crowded around me, their voices a blur of urgency and protocol. One of them, a woman with kind eyes, placed an oxygen mask over my mouth, telling me to breathe. I tried, but each breath felt like it was tearing something inside me apart. My heart pounded like a trapped bird, wings fluttering, desperate to escape. Through the haze of pain, I fumbled for my phone. My fingers were clumsy, half numb, but I managed to unlock the screen. Alex. I needed Alex. She'd know what to do, she'd be there, right? I pressed call and listened as it rang. She answered on the third ring, her voice sharp, distracted. Can it wait? She snapped. Brennan's got his big investor presentation today. I tried to tell her. Tried to say that I was scared, that I needed her. But the words got tangled in my throat, drowned by the oxygen mask and the beeping machines. Alex, I croaked, but she was already gone. She hung up without a second thought, leaving me to stare at the screen, her name fading like a ghost. The paramedics moved quickly, lifting me onto a stretcher with practiced efficiency. Their hands were gentle but firm, guiding me through the chaos. The conference room felt 1,000 miles away now, its glass walls a memory already slipping through my fingers. The pain spiked again, white-hot and merciless, and I clenched my teeth to keep from screaming. I heard someone, maybe Alan, say something about getting back to the agenda, about continuing the meeting. My stomach lurched. Even in the face of this, they couldn't pause for a single breath. The hallway was a blur of white and gray, figures rushing past like ghosts. The paramedics spoke in clipped, calm tones, but their eyes were tense, worried. I caught fragments, appendix, possible rupture, blood pressure dropping. I tried to focus on their faces, to hold on to something human, but it felt like the world was slipping away. My vision dimmed at the edges, colors fading into a cold, gray mist. The ambulance ride was a fever dream. Sirens wailed, lights flashed, but inside it felt impossibly small, the air thick with antiseptic and fear. One paramedic, a young guy with freckles, leaned over me, his voice steady. "We're taking you to St. Luke's," he said. "You're going to be okay. Just hang on." I nodded, or thought I did. Every movement felt disconnected, like I was controlling a puppet from somewhere far away. I thought about Alex, about her voice, her indifference. Couldn't it wait? I'd given her everything, my time, my heart, my trust. And now, when it mattered most, she wasn't here. The betrayal burned hotter than the pain, a different kind of wound that no surgeon could fix. I wondered if she'd even check in later, or if Brennan's pitch deck would take all her attention. I felt something cold trickle down my cheek. Tears or sweat. I couldn't tell. The hospital doors swung open, and a team of nurses and doctors converged on me like a storm. They rattled off questions, inserted 4 lines, monitored screens that beeped with urgency. My world narrowed to the sterile white walls and the beeping machines that counted each second I clung to consciousness. A nurse with kind eyes squeezed my hand, her grip steady and grounding. "You're going into surgery," she said. "We're going to take care of you, okay? Just hold on." I wanted to ask for Alex. I wanted to believe she'd come running through those doors, breathless with worry. But I knew better. I closed my eyes and let the darkness take me, alone on a stretcher, unsure if I'd ever wake up. I survived. Barely. The surgeon's voice, calm but weary, echoed in my head long after he'd finished explaining. "Appendicitis complicated by peritonitis," he'd said, drawing a neat line in the air as though it were a simple equation. But the pain had felt anything but simple. They'd rushed me into the operating room, knives and lights and sterile smells, a blur of faces and masks. When I woke up, days later, it was to a white room and the low hum of machines keeping me tethered to this side of consciousness. Every breath felt like an effort, my body weak, as if I'd been broken down and rebuilt in pieces. Nurse Camille was the first real face I saw, soft brown eyes, a voice that felt like a hand on my shoulder. She told me I'd been lucky. That immediate surgery had saved my life. I nodded, my head heavy, mind foggy from the anesthesia and the shock of everything. She checked the machines, asked if I was in pain, then mentioned, almost as an afterthought, we didn't have a record of any family contact. "Is someone coming?" The question hit like a punch to the ribs. My wife. The one person who should have been here. My throat was too dry to speak. I closed my eyes and let the question hang in the air. 3 days passed. Days that blurred together for drips, hourly checks, the smell of disinfectant that clung to every breath. Every time the door opened, my heart would lift, hoping it might be Alex, hoping she'd walk in with flowers and apologies, promising she'd been worried sick. But the door kept opening for nurses with polite smiles, doctors with clipped questions, and the occasional housekeeping staff. No Alex. No sign she'd even called. The nurses tried to hide their pity when they asked about my family. I gave them the same answer every time. "She's busy." I'd say it like it was a joke, but every time I said it, a part of me felt smaller. On the 4th morning, the fluorescent lights flickered, and I woke up to voices outside my room. Familiar ones. Alex's voice, sharp, impatient, slicing through the sterile hush. Brennan's laugh, a low, easy sound that always made my skin crawl. I strained to hear the words, catching bits and pieces between the shuffle of nurses and the hum of machines. "The presentation went so well," Brennan said, his voice slick with self-satisfaction. "They loved the concept. Funding's all but secured." Alex answered, "I'm glad. It's about time things went our way." I could practically see her smile, that one that never reached her eyes. They barged in like they owned the place, like I was an inconvenience on their way to a better appointment. Alex's hair was perfectly styled, makeup immaculate, the picture of a woman who'd planned her visit with precision. Brennan looked like he'd just stepped off a stage, suit crisp, grin practiced. Alex's eyes swept over me, quick, clinical. "How are you feeling?" she asked, her tone an afterthought. I opened my mouth to answer, but she was already turning to Brennan, laughing at some inside joke. It felt like I was watching a movie of my own life from the cheap seats. I wanted to ask her where she'd been, why she hadn't come when I needed her. But my mouth was dry, my tongue heavy, and my heart even heavier. Nurse Camille slipped in quietly, her presence like a balm against the cold. She held a clipboard, her face set in that polite but firm expression I'd come to rely on. She moved to Alex, extending the clipboard with a pin clipped to the top. "Mrs. Carter," she said, addressing her by my name, a name that suddenly felt foreign. "We need you to sign this." Alex's face changed instantly, her eyes narrowing, jaw tightening as she took the clipboard. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice a whip crack in the quiet room. Camille didn't flinch. "It's a routine update. It confirms your role in his medical decisions. Her eyes flicked to me, a subtle question in the shift of her gaze. Alex started reading the document, her fingers trembling slightly. But she stammered, "Why would I need to sign this now? I'm his wife." Brennan shifted beside her, his smirk slipping just a little. I stayed silent, letting the silence stretch like a blade between us. Camille's voice was calm but unwavering. "Because the form has been updated," she said. "Your husband, Mr. Carter, made some changes to his emergency contact and medical proxy after his surgery." She turned to me, her eyes softening, but her words felt like a hammer driving home a nail. "Mr. Carter, do you want me to explain it, or would you like to?" I swallowed, my throat raw. "I'd prefer you did," I croaked, my voice thin but steady. Camille nodded, turning back to Alex. "The medical proxy now lists Mateo Ramirez as the designated contact," she said. "As such, any decisions regarding his care, beyond standard treatment, must be discussed with Mr. Ramirez unless Mr. Carter requests otherwise." Alex's face went pale, lips pressed together so tightly they seemed to vanish. Brennan's smirk was gone completely, replaced by something like panic. Alex turned to me, eyes wide, voice trembling. You did this?" she asked, her tone accusing, as if I'd committed some betrayal. I met her gaze, unflinching. "Yes," I said. "I did." She gaped at me like I'd grown another head. "But I'm your wife," she cried, her voice rising, catching the attention of the nurse at the station outside. Brennan shifted uncomfortably, his foot tapping a nervous rhythm on the tile. I felt something harden inside me, a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. "I know," I said, "but you weren't here when I needed you." Mateo was. Brennan let out a derisive snort, but I didn't even look at him. My eyes were locked on Alex, waiting to see if the woman I'd once loved could see the damage she'd done. Camille cleared her throat. "Mrs. Carter, I understand this is difficult, but it's his right to make this choice. If you have any questions about the process, I'd be happy to answer them later." She guided them to the door with gentle firmness, giving me a small nod that felt like an embrace. Alex paused in the doorway, her mouth opening as if to protest, but nothing came out. Brennan's hand on her arm guided her out, his eyes cold as they met mine. I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. I just stared at the ceiling, my chest rising and falling in steady, measured breaths. The door closed with a soft click, leaving me alone with the machines and my thoughts. I wasn't being petty. I wasn't being vindictive. I was protecting myself, because the people who should have held my hand chose a pitch deck over my pulse. And in that sterile, too quiet room, I decided I would never let them choose for me again. I stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the air around me like a heavy blanket I couldn't shake off. My body ached in ways I didn't know were possible, but the pain was no longer sharp. It had settled into a dull throb that matched the beat of the heart monitor. A steady reminder that I was alive, that I'd survived something that had nearly killed me, and that, somehow, felt both miraculous and hollow. The quiet in the room was a gift I hadn't realized I'd needed, giving me space to think, to breathe, to piece together the fragments of the last few days. The door opened quietly and Nurse Camille stepped in, her eyes warm but professional. She carried a small stack of papers clipped neatly together, and I could tell from her posture that this wasn't a routine check-in. She pulled the chair from the corner and sat beside my bed. "Mr. Carter," she began, her voice soft but steady, "we need to discuss something important." My breath caught. I'd had enough important conversations lately to last a lifetime. But I nodded, letting her continue. "It's about your emergency contact and medical proxy," she said. "You listed Mateo Ramirez as your new contact after the surgery." She handed me the papers. I took them, my hands trembling slightly. I thought back to that moment, the darkness after surgery, the knowledge that I'd woken up alone, that no one I expected had been there. Mateo had. Mateo, who'd driven 2 hours without me even asking, who'd slept in the plastic chair next to my bed when no one else showed up. I remembered the way he'd held my hand and said, "You're not alone, man. I got you." And in that moment, I knew I didn't owe anyone my loyalty just because we shared a last name. Family isn't always who you're born to, it's who shows up. Camille cleared her throat gently. "Legally," she said, "this means that decisions about your care, anything beyond standard procedures, must go through Mr. Ramirez unless you instruct otherwise." She paused. "Your wife, Alex. She's not listed on your medical proxy anymore." She studied my face for a reaction, but I kept it calm, letting the truth settle like a stone at the bottom of a pond. That's how it should be, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. She didn't answer when I needed her. Camille nodded. I understand, she said. We just wanted to confirm that this was intentional and that you're aware of the implications. The door opened again, and Alex and Brennan stepped in like they owned the place. Alex's expression was a mix of confusion and indignation, her jaw tight, eyes scanning the room like it was some courtroom where she'd been wronged. Brennan looked smug, like he'd already decided this was a waste of time. Camille stood and turned to them with a practiced smile. Mrs. Carter, she greeted. Mr. Carter has updated his emergency contact and medical proxy. She didn't waste words. I respected that about her. Alex's eyes widened. What? She said, her voice high and brittle. She glanced at me, as if I just confessed to a crime. You changed it? Without telling me. I took a breath, trying to steady the trembling in my hands. After the surgery, I said, my voice low. When I woke up, you weren't here. Mateo was. He's the one who showed up. I kept my eyes locked on her, unflinching. I needed someone I could trust. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. But I'm your wife, she finally managed. The word felt foreign on her tongue, as though she were trying to convince herself of its meaning. Brennan snorted. This is ridiculous, he said. Mateo's not even family. You're making a mistake. His voice dripped with contempt, like he couldn't fathom a world where I might choose loyalty over obligation. Camille stepped between us, her presence a calm but unwavering force. Mr. Carter has the legal right to choose his own emergency contact, she said. It's his decision, and it's been documented and filed. Alex shook her head, her hair falling across her face. You can't just replace me, she stammered. We're married. That means something. I looked at her then, really looked at her, and saw the distance that had been growing between us for months, years, maybe. It was more than just the investor presentations and the late nights. It was the choices she'd made over and over again to put Brennan, her brother, first. To put their ambitions, their goals, their big picture, ahead of the man who was supposed to be her partner. I didn't want to do this, I said quietly. But I needed to know that someone would actually be there when I couldn't speak for myself. And you weren't. My voice cracked, the hurt breaking through the anger. I called you from that ambulance, Alex. I could barely breathe. And you told me to wait. Brennan shifted uncomfortably. Look, he said, his tone patronizing, this is all getting blown out of proportion. We're family. We need to stick together. I turned to him, my eyes cold. Were we family when you stood by while she ignored me? Were we family when you laughed about your presentation instead of asking if I'd live? Silence settled in the room, heavy as stone. Camille cleared her throat. Mrs. Carter, Mr. Brennan, she said. If you have any further questions, please address them through Mr. Carter's designated contact. Otherwise, I need to ask you to leave so he can rest. Alex's face crumpled for a moment, her eyes shining with something I couldn't quite name. Guilt? Anger? Maybe both. But then she turned to Brennan, her features hardening, and nodded. They left without another word, the door clicking shut behind them like a final verdict. I sank back into the bed, exhausted but strangely relieved. The silence felt different now, less like a punishment, more like a clean slate. Camille turned to me with a small smile. You did the right thing, she said. It's your life, your voice. I nodded, the knot in my chest loosening just a little. Thank you, I whispered. She patted my hand, then left me alone to my thoughts. I stared at the ceiling, breathing in the quiet. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was the one in control of my own story. No matter what came next, I wouldn't let anyone else decide how it ended. The hallway seemed longer than I remembered when I first stepped out of my room, for pole rolling beside me like a silent companion. My legs were shaky, each step an echo of the pain I'd endured, but I pushed forward, determined to stretch my body and maybe, in the process, stretch my mind back into shape. Nurse Camille had encouraged me to walk, to breathe, to reclaim the space that had become my entire world since surgery. The quiet hum of the hospital at night was a comfort. Machines beeped in steady rhythm. Nurses murmured in hushed tones. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and something else, maybe hope, maybe dread. I wasn't sure anymore. I turned a corner and nearly collided with Mateo, who had a way of appearing exactly when I needed him. He wore his usual easy grin, but his eyes were serious, searching my face like he was measuring the damage. Hey man, he said, taking the 4-pole from my hand and guiding me to a small alcove with 2 chairs. You're supposed to be resting. I tried to smile, but it felt forced, like a mask that no longer fit. I needed to move, I muttered. He nodded, the corners of his eyes creasing with worry. I get it, but you also need to let yourself heal. Physically, and, he didn't finish, but I knew what he meant. Emotionally, spiritually, every way a person can be broken and stitched back together. We sat there in the alcove, the hum of the hospital a constant backdrop. Mateo pulled out his phone and scrolled for a second. I got in touch with Soraya, he said. My stomach tightened at the mention of her name. Soraya had been in HR at my company once, a detail-oriented force of nature who never missed a discrepancy. She's already looking into the insurance situation, Mateo continued. It's weird, she found a ton of missing paperwork. Like someone had flagged your onboarding file for deletion. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Flagged? As in intentionally erased? Mateo met my gaze, his jaw tightening. Yeah, she's sure of it. A sick feeling settled in my gut. I thought back to the months before this mess, when Alex had offered to help me with the benefits paperwork, just to be sure it all went through, she'd said, smiling in that easy way that made me believe she was doing me a favor. She'd been volunteering in HR at the time, a courtesy project Brennan had arranged so she could keep busy. I'd thought nothing of it. Why would I? She was my wife. The thought hit me like a punch now. So it's possible, I said slowly, that she deleted my benefits file on purpose. Mateo's eyes darkened. Yeah, man. It looks like sabotage. I felt my heart clench, a new kind of pain that had nothing to do with my surgery. All those nights I'd spent worrying about deadlines, about performance reviews and project timelines, all while the person who was supposed to have my back was quietly gutting my safety net. Why would she do that? I whispered, more to myself than to Mateo. He shrugged, but the answer was written in the lines around his eyes. Maybe because it's easier to drain you dry when you're already hurting, he said. Or maybe she and Brennan needed a financial scapegoat. I don't know. I closed my eyes, breathing in the antiseptic air, letting the words sink in. The betrayal felt like a second wound, deeper and more jagged than the first. Soraya's going to send me the full report, Mateo said, his voice gentler now. We'll get to the bottom of it. I promise. I nodded, but my hands were trembling. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling under my feet. Every memory of Alex's smile, every late-night text telling me she loved me, every morning coffee we'd shared, they all felt like lies now, carefully constructed to keep me complacent. Mateo reached over and gripped my shoulder, steadying me. You're not alone in this, he said. We'll fight it. Every piece of it. I met his eyes, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the old me, the one who believed in people, who believed that love was stronger than betrayal. I wanted that man back. I wanted to believe again. But the ground was too unsteady, the trust too broken. Thanks, man, I murmured. I don't even know where to start. Mateo squeezed my shoulder. You start by healing, he said. Let Soraya do her thing. Let me help. You've carried too much on your own for too long. We sat there in silence for a moment, the weight of everything pressing down, but also, somehow, lifting. Just having him there, having someone in my corner who wasn't part of the betrayal, felt like a lifeline. A nurse walked by and gave us a polite smile, but I barely registered it. My mind was spinning with memories. Alex's laughter in the kitchen, her late-night phone calls with Brennan that she'd brushed off as just work. Every piece felt like a puzzle I'd never really seen until now, and the picture it formed was ugly. I trusted her, I whispered, more to the ceiling than to Mateo. God, I trusted her. Mateo didn't interrupt. He let the words hang there, let them breathe. And she took that trust and turned it into a weapon, I continued. I gave her everything, and she used it against me. My voice cracked, and I hated how weak it sounded. But I didn't care anymore. I was done pretending. We're going to fix this, Mateo said, his voice firm. One step at a time. You're not going to let her, or him, win. I nodded, letting the words sink in. One step at a time, I echoed. I knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be lawyers, accountants, maybe even police. There would be days when I'd want to crawl back into the safety of that old life, to believe the lie that everything could go back to normal. But I also knew that I couldn't. Not anymore. Alex had crossed a line, and there was no coming back from that. Mateo stood, offering his hand. Let's get you back to bed, he said, his smile returning. You've got healing to do. And tomorrow, We start figuring out how to make this right. I took his hand and let him guide me back to my room. As I settled under the sterile sheets, I felt something inside me shift. A small spark of strength, a quiet resolve that told me I was done being the victim. That no matter how long it took, I would get to the bottom of every lie, every betrayal. And when I did, I would make sure that the people who tried to bury me would finally understand that I wasn't going down without a fight. I didn't recognize the stack of bills that arrived in my mailbox the day after I got home. Each envelope felt heavier than the last, each printed name, a hospital, a surgeon, a medication supplier, like an accusation I couldn't defend. I sat at the kitchen table, Mateo across from me, his brow furrowed in that way he had when he was calculating solutions. He'd taken it upon himself to help me sort through everything, unasked but deeply appreciated. "It's going to be okay," he said quietly. I almost laughed at the lie, but the effort felt too heavy on my chest. "Mateo, they won over $100,000. I whispered, voice hoarse from days of silent worry. I picked up a bill and ran my thumb over the hospital logo. "Every single one of these has my name on it. Every single one." My stomach churned, a nauseating twist of anger and disbelief. "I had insurance," I said, as if saying it out loud might reverse the reality staring back at me. "We paid into that plan every month. This shouldn't even be possible." Mateo nodded, eyes scanning the spreadsheet he'd started populating names, dates, amounts, a neat accounting of my financial collapse. "Yeah, I know," he murmured. "But when Soraya looked into it, she found the benefits paperwork had been deleted from your file. Everything, all of it, like you'd never enrolled." He sighed. This wasn't some clerical error. It was deliberate. The realization settled in my chest like wet cement. I closed my eyes, picturing Alex's face the day she offered to help out with HR. She'd called it a courtesy, a way to show support while she was between consulting gigs. "You're always so busy," she'd said, running a hand through my hair. "Let me handle the paperwork. I'll make sure everything's in order." I'd thanked her. I'd trusted her. That trust had turned into the biggest mistake of my life. Mateo's fingers drummed lightly on the table, his mind clearly working a mile a minute. "I talked to Zaria," he said, eyes flicking to me. "She's a forensic accountant now, tough as nails. I gave her access to your accounts, with your permission, and she's already found some weird stuff." He slid a file across the table. I opened it and felt the blood drain from my face. There it was in black and white. Bank withdrawals I didn't recognize, ghost credit card charges from places I'd never been. But the one that made my hand shake was the transfer, a chunk of money that I'd saved over the years, the safety net for our future. Gone. $42,000, I murmured, my voice cracking. That was supposed to be for our house. Alex always said it got absorbed into expenses. Mateo's jaw clenched. "It didn't," he said flatly. "Zaria traced it. It went straight to Braincrest Ventures, Brennan's company. Every last cent." I felt like I'd been punched. My vision swam. All those late nights working overtime. Every birthday dinner I'd skipped to save up. Wasted. Betrayed. She lied, I whispered. She stole from me and gave it to him. My hands balled into fists. That was supposed to be our future. She took that and gave it away like it meant nothing. Mateo reached across the table and gripped my wrist. "She doesn't get to do this without consequences," he said, his voice low and steady. "We'll get it back. We'll fight this." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But every part of me felt hollow, like someone had scooped out the man I used to be and left an empty shell. "I don't even know where to start," I confessed, my voice trembling. Mateo didn't let go. "You start with this," he said, pointing to the file. "You build a case. You get the right people to see it. And you remember who you are. You're not just a victim, man. You're the guy who fought through surgery alone. You're the guy who's still standing." His words lit a spark in me, a flicker of the fire I thought I'd lost. I straightened in my chair, the pain in my side a reminder that I'd survived worse than this. "Okay," I said. "Okay, what's the next step?" Mateo smiled, a fierce glint in his eyes. "We go to Zaria's office," he said. "We get every document, every transaction. And we call a lawyer." He leaned in. "You have the receipts now? It's time to make them pay." The drive to Zaria's office felt like a journey into the heart of every bad decision I'd ever made. The city blurred by, gray and cold, and I found myself staring at the window's reflection, wondering who the man in the glass even was. Mateo was beside me, talking through the plan, but I only caught fragments: fraud complaints, financial recovery, the possibility of criminal charges. The words were heavy, but they felt right, like armor I could finally wear. Zaria's office was in a converted warehouse, all exposed brick and industrial chic. She met us at the door, a tall woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense aura. "Let's get to it," she said, leading us to a conference room filled with printouts and spreadsheets. "I've traced every suspicious transaction," she said, sliding a stack of papers to me. "This is the financial autopsy." I scanned the list: withdrawals from my accounts to shell companies, credit card charges that matched Brennan's travel schedule, payments to consultants I'd never hired. My stomach turned. How did they think they'd get away with this? I asked, voice hoarse. Zaria arched an eyebrow. "Because you trusted them," she said simply. "They counted on that." A quiet rage built in my chest, a pressure that felt dangerous if I let it explode. But I kept it contained, focusing on the numbers, the dates, the undeniable truth. "Can we prove it?" I asked. Zaria smiled, but it was cold. "Oh, we can prove it," she said. "We can make sure they can't run from this. You've got a paper trail a mile long." They were sloppy. Mateo leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his smile fierce. "This is just the beginning, man," he said. "They tried to bury you. Now you get to bury them." I felt something inside me settle, a quiet resolve that I wasn't done yet, that maybe, just maybe, I'd come out of this stronger than they'd ever imagined. I gathered the papers, each one a piece of the story they thought they'd hidden. "Let's bring this house of cards down," I said, my voice steady. And for the first time in weeks, I believed I could. I sat in the guest room that had become my makeshift office, a pile of old financial documents spread across the bed like a map of every mistake I'd made. The overhead light cast harsh shadows, highlighting the red circles Zaria had drawn in pin on each suspicious transaction. My eyes felt dry, like I'd been staring at a desert with no oasis in sight. "Trust fund." Those words glared back at me from one particularly damning page. I'd almost forgotten about it. A modest inheritance from my grandfather, meant to mature on my 30th birthday, a promise of security that should have been there, waiting for me. But I'd never seen it, never even got a letter or an email. It was as if it had evaporated into thin air. Zaria sat across from me, her laptop open, glasses perched on the tip of her nose. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she muttered numbers and dates, piecing together the puzzle that had stolen my future. "You said your grandfather left it in a trust?" she asked, her voice sharp and focused. I nodded, my throat tight. "Yeah, it was supposed to be released last year, but I never got a notice. I figured maybe there was a delay, some paperwork thing." Even as I said it, I heard how naive I sounded. She shook her head, a small, sympathetic frown. "It wasn't a paperwork thing," she said, voice clipped. "It was stolen." She turned the screen toward me, a spreadsheet filled with lines that blurred together until she pointed to a single transaction date, the week after my 30th birthday. "This is when the trust matured," she said, eyes locked on mine. "And this is when it was redirected legally, apparently." She made air quotes with her fingers. "Legally redirected to an account in your name, but you never saw it." My stomach dropped. "How is that even possible?" I croaked. "I never signed anything." Zaria sighed, her face hardening. "You didn't," she said. "But someone did. And your wife had power of attorney access at the time. She was listed as your proxy on file because of the concussion you had." The memory hit like a slap. That concussion, a minor car accident on my way home from work. Alex had fussed over me, made me soup, arranged my follow-up appointments. I'd felt grateful, lucky even, to have a wife who cared enough to handle the paperwork. I'd signed forms she handed me without even reading them, because I trusted her, because I thought she was on my side. Zaria leaned back in her chair, her eyes sharp. "Your signature was on the release form," she said. "But the date? You were in the hospital, recovering. There's no way you signed that." She handed me a printout, my signature staring back at me like a ghost from a life I thought I'd lived honestly. "Brennan's signature is listed as the witness," she added. And that's how they did it. My vision blurred, fury and disbelief clashing in my head until I felt like I might actually explode. "So they forged my signature," I said slowly, the words tasting like poison. "They took the money and left me with nothing." Zaria nodded. "That's exactly what they did." I leaned back, feeling the weight of betrayal pressed down on my chest. "How much was in that trust?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. "Enough," she said, her voice gentle. "It wasn't millions, but it was a foundation, A way to start over if you ever needed it. And now, she trailed off, but I understood. Now it was gone. I thought about my grandfather, a quiet man who'd worked 2 jobs his whole life just to make sure I'd have a little something to lean on. I remembered the way he'd smile at me across the dinner table, his hands rough from decades of honest work. I wondered what he'd say if he knew the woman I'd married had stolen his gift to me and handed it to her brother. My fists clenched, nails biting into my palms. I'd given Alex everything, my love, my trust, my future, and she'd handed it over like a party favor. I want to get it back, I said, my voice low but certain. Zaria's smile was thin but fierce. We will, she said. We'll file a complaint with the trust administrator. We'll notify the bank that accepted the transfer. And we'll get a lawyer who knows how to handle fraud. She paused. But you have to be ready. It's going to get ugly. I nodded. I've seen ugly, I muttered. This is personal now. She closed her laptop and leaned forward. There's one more thing, she said, her voice almost reluctant. Your aunt, the trust executor, she sent over the scanned forms. She's upset, to say the least. She said you'd always been responsible, that you'd never even asked about the trust because you wanted to make it on your own. My chest tightened. That was true. I'd told myself I'd wait until I'd earned it, until I deserved it. And now that patience had turned into a weapon against me. Zaria handed me the printed form with my signature, the date circled in red. She said she'd help, she said softly. She feels guilty. I stared at the paper, my name forged in a script that looked like mine, but felt wrong. I imagined Alex's hand guiding the pen, Brennan's smirk as he signed the witness line. The betrayal cut deeper than any scalpel. She knew exactly how to get to me. I said, my voice trembling with rage. She used every bit of trust one gave her and turned it into this. I felt tears prick my eyes, but I blinked them away. I wouldn't give them that power anymore. She played the long game. I continued. And I let her. Zaria reached over and placed a steady hand on mine. She didn't win, she said. Not yet. You're still here. You're still fighting. I nodded, a grim determination settling over me like armor. Then let's fight, I said. Let's burn every bridge they built on my back. She smiled, a flash of steel in her eyes. That's the spirit, she said. Tomorrow, we meet with the lawyer. And then we make them wish they'd never underestimated you. I exhaled, the rage and pain still burning, but now tempered with a purpose I hadn't felt in weeks. Alex and Brennan had taken so much from me. Money, trust, even the last gift my grandfather had left me. But they hadn't taken everything. They hadn't taken me. And I would fight to make sure they never did again. Alex's invitation arrived as a text message, its tone so casual I almost choked on my coffee. Dinner tomorrow night? Just us. Let's clear the air. As though everything she'd done could be wiped away with a single meal. I stared at the message for a long time, wondering if she'd even considered that my trust wasn't hers to summon anymore. Mateo sat across from me, watching the anger play across my face. Are you going to go? He asked finally. I looked up at him and nodded. I am, I said. But I'm not going alone. He didn't even ask who I'd bring. We both knew the answer. Zaria agreed immediately. I'll come as your financial advisor, she said, eyes glinting with a quiet satisfaction. We'll treat it like any other meeting. I wanted to thank her, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I simply nodded, grateful for her calm strength. The next evening, I put on a collared shirt that felt too tight around the neck. My reflection in the mirror looked tired but determined, a man who'd crawled through hell and come out standing. Mateo drove us to the restaurant. A trendy bistro Alex had chosen, no doubt to show off to the waitstaff that she was sophisticated, put together. A small part of me marveled at the gall of it all. The larger part of me felt like I was walking into enemy territory. She was already there when we arrived, seated at a table near the window, a glass of white wine in her hand. Brennan hovered beside her like a watchdog, his smile too bright, too rehearsed. I felt my jaw tighten. Zaria placed a reassuring hand on my arm as we approached. Just breathe, she murmured. I did. One breath, then another. As we reached the table, Alex's eyes flickered to Zaria, her smile faltering for a moment before she recovered. Hi, she said, her tone all warm honey. I didn't realize you'd be bringing someone. She gestured to the empty chairs. Sit, please. Brennan's smirk returned. This is supposed to be a family dinner, he added. You sure you want to bring an outsider? Zaria met his gaze coolly. I'm here in a professional capacity, she said evenly. You don't mind, do you? Brennan's smirk faded. We ordered some overpriced salmon dish that barely looked like a meal, and then the room fell into an uneasy silence. Alex cleared her throat and gave me a practiced smile. I wanted to talk about everything that's happened, she began, her voice soft. Things got messy. I know that, but we can still work things out. I felt my heart harden. Like how you worked out my trust fund? I asked, my tone sharper than I'd intended. Her eyes widened, but she recovered quickly. That was a misunderstanding, she said, glancing at Brennan. We were just trying to consolidate accounts. For us. I let out a bitter laugh. For us. I shook my head. That money was mine. My grandfather left it to me. And you forged my signature to get it. Brennan leaned forward, his eyes cold. You're being dramatic, he said. It's not like we stole from you. Zarya raised an eyebrow. Actually, that's exactly what you did, she said, pulling a file from her bag and laying it on the table. Brennan's face went pale. Alex's smile disappeared. What is this? She demanded, her voice trembling. Zarya's tone was calm, but edged with steel. It's a summary of every suspicious financial transaction tied to your accounts, she said. Withdrawals, shell companies, forged documents, everything. And before you argue, we've already shared it with legal counsel. Alex's jaw dropped. Brennan's hand clenched around his glass. You can't just, he started, but I cut him off. I can't, I said. Because it's mine. My money. My life. And I'm done letting you treat me like an afterthought. Alex's eyes darted between us, her confidence draining by the second. But we're married, she stammered. We were building a life together. Brennan needed help with his business, and I thought, you thought wrong, I snapped. You thought I'd never notice, that I'd keep working and paying the bills while you funneled everything we'd saved into his failing company. Brennan's face flushed red. Brencrest Ventures is not failing, he spat. Zarya arched an eyebrow. Then how do you plan to cover the convertible note gap? She asked. His mouth opened, then closed. Alex looked at him, her face crumpling. Brennan, she whispered. His silence was the only answer she needed. Zarya leaned forward, her voice low and lethal. I've already shared everything with the lawyer, she said. You'll both be hearing from them soon. And from the IRS. And from the bank that handled the trust. Alex's face turned white. She looked at me, eyes desperate. Please, she whispered. We can fix this. We can start over. I felt something shift inside me. A final, irrevocable end to whatever love I'd once felt for her. You ended this the day you chose him over me, I said quietly. The day you decided a pitch deck was more important than my life. Brennan made a noise of protest, but Zarya silenced him with a glance. It's over, she said. The accounts are frozen. The authorities are involved. You'd better get yourselves a good lawyer. The waiter brought the check, and I reached for it, but Zarya placed her hand over mine. Let me, she said. Consider it part of the service. Alex watched us, her eyes hollow. Brennan stood abruptly, muttering something about getting ahead of this. I watched them walk away, hand in hand, but I didn't feel the old pang of loss. I felt nothing but relief. I turned to Zarya, my chest light for the first time in months. Thank you, I said. She smiled, a warmth that felt like the sun breaking through clouds. You did the hard part, she said. You faced them. I nodded. Yeah, I murmured. And now I get to rebuild. As we walked out into the night, I realized that I'd finally started to feel free. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, it was mine. 2 weeks passed in a blur of phone calls, legal meetings, and email chains that felt like spiderwebs tangled around my neck. Every morning, I woke to new messages. My lawyer's crisp summaries of case status updates, Zarya's latest financial discovery, Soraya's HR documentation. All of it stacked in my inbox like a fortress against the chaos that had been my life. Mateo checked in every day, his voice always steady, a lifeline to something that felt real. But the nights were the worst. That's when the memories came. Alex's voice in the conference room, Brennan's smirk as he signed papers that bore my name. Every lie replayed itself like a broken film reel, looping endlessly, daring me to forget. But I didn't. I couldn't. The fallout started quietly. A small article buried on the second page of the business section. Brencrest Ventures under investigation for financial mismanagement. I read it twice, the words sinking in like slow poison. I'd spent so many nights hating myself for missing the signs, for being blind to the games they played. Seeing it in print felt like a public confession of my own failure. But then I saw Brennan's name, printed in black and white, and I realized the game was over. His investors pulled out days later. Mateo called me the moment the news broke. "They're on the run, man," he said, laughter in his voice that was half relief, half disbelief. "They're finally paying the price." Alex's name came up next, quietly at first, just a mention in the HR circles she'd once bragged about. A consulting firm she'd worked with on side projects had flagged her in an internal fraud review. The rumor spread fast, and within days she'd been escorted out, her ID badge confiscated, her email deactivated. I pictured her, standing outside the glass tower she'd once called her second home, clutching a cardboard box of things she'd stolen from me, her eyes wide, her mouth pressed tight. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, but that part was small and silent now. When the official fraud complaints hit, it was like the final domino falling. Zaria's reports had laid out every transaction, every forged signature, every shell company. My lawyer filed them all in neat, ruthless succession. The stolen trust fund, the forged documents, the bank transfers. Every piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin they'd built for themselves. Brennan's smirk was gone from my mind now. All I saw was the panic that must have hit him when the bank accounts froze, when the IRS came knocking, when the investors demanded their money back. Alex's excuses, her tears, her promises to make it right, all of them dissolved in the face of cold, hard facts. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, I sat on the small balcony of my temporary apartment, the stack of reports in my lap. I watched the light fade and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not the kind that comes from forgetting, but the kind that comes from knowing you've done everything you could. The systems they'd abused, financial, legal, personal, were now the very ones turning against them. I didn't need to scream or fight anymore. I just needed to let the truth do its work. Mateo knocked on the door, 2 quick raps that felt like a friend instead of an intruder. He stepped outside with me, a 6-pack of cheap beer in hand. "You've got that look," he said, handing me a bottle. The look of a man who's finally free. I took it, the cold glass grounding me. "It's not over yet," I said, "but it's starting to feel like it could be." He nodded, eyes fixed on the city lights. "They thought they could bleed you dry and walk away smiling," he said. "But you fought back. You didn't roll over. That's what matters." I took a sip, the bitterness sharp but honest. I think the hardest part was realizing I couldn't trust her. I admitted. I spent so long telling myself she'd come back, that she'd apologize, that somehow it was all a mistake. Mateo's gaze softened. "That's what good people do," he said. "They give second chances. But man, sometimes you've got to protect yourself. You did that. You didn't let her keep you down." I nodded, the words soaking in like rain on dry ground. "I just wanted to be loved," I said quietly. "That's all I ever wanted." Mateo leaned over and clinked his bottle against mine. "And you will be," he said. "The right way, with the right person. You've got to believe that." We sat in silence, the city breathing around us. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe too. The next morning, my lawyer called. "Brencrest Ventures is officially dissolving," he said, his voice triumphant. "Federal auditors are stepping in, and there's talk of criminal charges. It's going to get messy for them." I felt a weight lift off my chest, a quiet exhale of relief. "And Alex?" I asked. He hesitated. "She's under investigation too," he said finally. "Her name is on the documents. They're looking at her involvement." I closed my eyes, a bittersweet ache in my chest. I'd loved her once, fiercely. But the woman who'd lied, who'd stolen, who'd left me on that gurney alone, she was a stranger now. "Let them investigate," I said. She earned it. That night, I slept like a man who didn't have to watch his back in his own home. The dreams were different, no more shadows of betrayal, no more panic-stricken calls to a woman who wouldn't pick up. Just a quiet darkness, peaceful and whole. I woke to the sun streaming through the window, a warm glow on my face. It felt like a new day, a new life. Mateo was already in the kitchen, coffee brewing. "Big day," he said, handing me a mug. "You ready?" I nodded. "Yeah," I said. "I am." Because for the first time in months, I wasn't running from the pain anymore. I'd faced it. I'd fought it. And now, I was free. Free from lies. Free from the guilt that had chained me to people who didn't deserve me. Free to start over, on my own terms. And that freedom tasted better than any victory I'd ever imagined. I didn't expect the call from Alex's father. The number popped up on my screen, unfamiliar but unmistakable in its placement in my contacts. My heart skipped a beat, the memories flooding back, family dinners, birthdays, the kind of quiet respect I'd always felt for the man who'd once been my father-in-law. I hesitated for a moment, thumb hovering over the answer button, before finally pressing it. "Hello," I said, my voice cautious but calm. "It's me," he said, his voice low and rough, a tone I'd never heard from him before. "I don't know what happened," he began, and I could hear the disbelief in his words, the way they trembled. "She used to be so kind." I closed my eyes and took a breath. Kind. Once maybe. Before the lies. Before the money. Before Brennan and his promises of some tech empire that never materialized. I could hear the pain in his voice. A father who'd just discovered his daughter was a stranger. "She changed," I said quietly. "Somewhere along the way, she changed." He let out a sigh that sounded like the weight of the world had settled on his chest. "I raised her to be honest," he said. "To stand by the people she loved. I don't know where that went." His voice cracked. "I'm so sorry." The words surprised me. An apology from a man who'd done nothing wrong, who'd been blindsided like I had. "You don't owe me an apology," I said gently. "She made her choices." There was silence on the line, the kind that stretches like a rubber band about to snap. Then he spoke again, voice steadier now. "She's been cut off," he said. "No more support. No more family funds. If she wants to fix this, she's on her own." The finality in his voice was like a door slamming shut. I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "That's fair," I said. "She's had enough lifelines." A pause, then a sigh. "I always thought you were good for her," he said, the words heavy with regret. "I never thought she'd hurt you like this." My chest tightened. "I never thought she'd hurt me like this, either," I admitted. "But she did." He cleared his throat, his voice softening. "If you need anything, you call me," he said. "I mean that." I swallowed, the words catching in my throat. "Thank you," I whispered. "That means more than you know." We ended the call with a quiet goodbye, a shared sorrow that neither of us could fully name. I set the phone down and stared at the wall, the weight of everything pressing in on me. But there was a strange comfort in knowing he'd seen it too, that even her own father couldn't deny what she'd become. Brennan's call came later that night. I let it go to voicemail, but his voice still crawled through the speaker. "We're family," he said, his tone slick with desperation. "Can we work something out?" I felt a laugh bubble up in my chest, sharp and bitter. "Family," I muttered. "Were we family when I was on the operating table?" I thought of his laughter in the hallway, the way he looked right past me. "Were we family when you drained our accounts to save your app?" I hit delete without listening to the rest. The silence that followed felt like peace. I knew then that the ties they'd once wrapped around me were gone, cut clean. No regrets. The darkness had lifted, and I was free. The day Brennan's company officially dissolved was a day I'd marked on the calendar in red ink. It wasn't that I needed revenge, it was that I needed closure. The final confirmation that I wasn't crazy, that everything I'd felt and feared had been real. I arrived at my new place, a small but sunlit loft that felt like a breath of air after months in the dark, just as my phone buzzed with the email. Brincrest Ventures LLC, dissolution filed. A simple subject line, but it felt like a victory march. I opened the email and read the first line out loud, a small smile playing at the corners of my mouth. "Effective immediately," I said, voice calm but certain. "The company known as Brincrest Ventures is dissolved pending federal investigation." It was more than a document. It was proof. Proof that the web they'd spun was finally unraveling. Mateo was waiting for me inside, a paint roller in hand, his t-shirt splattered with streaks of blue. "You're looking at a free man," he said, grinning as he motioned to the walls. "Help me with this trim, or I'm going to regret offering to help you move." I laughed, the sound light and unburdened. "I'll get the corners," I said, picking up a brush. The smell of fresh paint and new beginnings filled the air, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was building something that couldn't be taken away. Every stroke of the roller was a step forward, every splash of color a promise to myself. I would live, and I would thrive, on my own terms. Zaria stopped by with a stack of files, her eyes shining with victory. "The financial plan is in place," she said, laying the folders on the counter like blueprints for the future. "Your accounts are secure, the trust is restored, and the stolen funds are being recovered. It's going to take time, but you're protected now." She smiled, and I saw the weariness in her eyes. the exhaustion from months of fighting battles that weren't even hers to fight. "Thank you," I said, the words thick with gratitude. "I don't know how to." She waved me off, her smile turning wry. "You don't have to," she said. "Just don't let them take your peace again." Later that night, I found myself at the small neighborhood bar down the street. Soraya met me there, a grin on her face that made me feel lighter just seeing it. "You look different," she said, sliding a whiskey across the table. "Less like a man on a gurney, more like a man who just escaped a sinking ship." I laughed, the sound genuine. "I guess that's accurate," I said. We talked about everything and nothing, old jobs, bad dates, the kind of small joys that make life feel worth living. At some point, the conversation drifted to the future. "What now?" she asked, her eyes curious but gentle. I took a slow sip of my drink, letting the warmth settle in my chest. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I know it's going to be my future this time. No more lifelines tied to the wrong people." Soraya leaned back, her smile warm. "That's a good place to start," she said. And in that moment, I realized that starting over didn't have to mean starting alone. A week later, I was unpacking the last box when I heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find Alex standing there, her eyes hollow, shoulders slumped. She held a small duffel bag in one hand, like she'd just come from some cheap motel. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice breaking. For a moment, I hesitated, the old ache stirring in my chest. The part of me that still remembered the girl who'd once held my hand through late nights and hard days. But that girl was gone, replaced by someone who'd sold my trust for a quick win. I stepped aside, motioning her in. She stood in the middle of the room, eyes scanning the fresh paint and the bright light. "You've made it nice," she said, voice small. I didn't respond. She shifted on her feet. "I've lost everything," she whispered. "Brennan's gone. The investors, they're coming after me now." Her voice cracked. "I don't know what to do." I took a breath, the pain sharp but necessary. "You did this to yourself," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "You had choices. You chose him over me. You chose greed over love." Her eyes filled with tears. "We can start over," she pleaded. "We can fix this." I shook my head. "No," I said. "You already ended it the day you chose your brother over my life." I met her gaze, steady and unwavering. "I'm not angry anymore. But I'm not yours to save anymore, either." She sobbed then, quiet and broken, the sound of a woman who'd finally realized the consequences of her actions. I watched her go, the door closing behind her like the final period at the end of a long, ugly chapter. I leaned against the frame for a moment, letting the weight of it settle over me. And then I turned back to my new life, the smell of fresh paint still lingering. Mateo was right. I was a free man. Free from the lies, the silence, the shadows of betrayal. Free to build something real with people who'd proven themselves by standing beside me, not by taking from me. I poured myself a drink and stepped out onto the balcony, the city alive beneath me. The hum of cars and laughter carried on the breeze, and I felt a smile tug at the corner of my mouth. The future wasn't written yet, but it was mine to shape. I closed my eyes, breathing in the night air, and felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Not loud, not flashy, just real. And for the first time in a long time, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be,